Russia has launched a military assault on Ukraine, hitting targets across the country. US President Joe Biden has condemned the attack as unjustified and unprovoked. Here in Germany, Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock has just said if the world does not respond, we will pay an even higher price. Russian President Vladimir Putin announced the move in an unscheduled TV address shortly before 6 a.m. in Moscow. He said he'd been left with no choice because of the threat emanating from Ukraine. Within minutes, explosions were reported in numerous places, including the southern port cities of Odessa and Mariupol, as well as Kramatorsk and Kharkiv in the east, Dnipro in central Ukraine, and the capital, Kyiv. DW's Fanny Facha is in the capital, Kyiv. Fanny, what a night, what a morning for people there. What is the situation like in Kyiv where you are?
Actually, it is worsening in terms of the announcement that are being made right now by the Ukrainian government. The US president is basically taking everything to social media, trying to inform people there. The Ukrainian defense minister says everyone who is able to hold a weapon is basically called upon to join the defense forces. That clearly underlines what's been already analyzed over the course of the past weeks, that Ukrainians' military forces are inferior compared to Russia's military. Now, we do not know how the situation is going to further escalate, but let me tell you, as we woke up to the explosions this morning, that really was a shock to many here. People in Kyiv didn't think, even to the last minute, that actually Russia is going to go so far as assaulting Kyiv, the capital city. After all, also Vladimir Putin pointed out in this surprising televised address this morning that this is, quote, a military operation in eastern Ukraine. But it turns out there are various reports that explosions are heard in many parts of the country, shellings and reports of people being injured and killed. Now, the problem is we cannot verify this information, so I'm not even going to talk about any numbers at this point, because as this escalation has entered a new phase, there are various accusations between Russian forces and Ukrainian government official military information. What is actually currently happening on the ground? I can only tell you, in fact, what I've been experiencing this morning, and that was a very, very critical situation. People here were packing up, trying to leave by car from the hotel where we are at this point. Also, we are hearing that there are a lot of people lined up at gasoline stations trying to fill up on gas, trying to leave to neighboring countries, Slovakia, Poland, towards the west. But we also hear at this point, if you're trying to leave Kyiv, it's in fact almost impossible to go towards the west. So much traffic has built up. Again, there are also people who are just staying put and are trying to inform themselves, actually, where is the nearest shelter when those sirens are going to go off again, likely as they did this morning, siren warning, or in fact telling people this is the time that you should look for your closest shelter.
And these are similar reports that we're getting, Fanny, from our other correspondents in the country, also from family and friends, personal messages I've been getting from different parts of the country, central parts of the country, in Dnipro, for example, waking up to these explosions. Could you tell us, the Ukrainian president announced he was introducing martial law. What does that entail? Martial law is usually introduced in times of crisis that could be a natural disaster situation of conflict or a war. So what is happening is basically the natural way of things as they proceed in any democratic country, to say so, to implement martial law, by that also implying to the citizens here that this is not the time that they should venture out, but they should actually stay put, stay at home, stay inside, look for the closest shelter position, and just remain also calm, because this is actually the concern here, that people will start to panic even more. And then what? How can you secure critical infrastructure that is needed to protect actually citizens and to protect people from a increasing escalation? So military law, martial law rather, is implemented because it can no longer be maintained or guaranteed that the civilian government law that is
in place normally can guarantee the security of citizens. This is when the military takes over, usually setting up checkpoints. We haven't seen it just yet here in the city center, but it's likely to happen. Military checkpoints, checking exiting streets from Kyiv, checking people who are on the street. What documents do they carry? Are they actually supposed to be on the street? It's also a law by which the government can sort of make sure and impose that people do not gather, that they really stay put and stay at home.
Exactly, and not be on the move. I was asked this morning about an 84-year-old man. How do we get him out of Ukraine? The problem is at the moment moving, and to stay put is the safest option, as you say. Tell us what else Zelenskyy has been saying today.
Zelenskyy made clear what he believes is not just a military operation, as Russia's President Vladimir Putin announced early this morning, but he says he expects basically that Russia wants to destroy Ukraine. Now, these are, of course, very strong words. And people here are hoping on the ground that it's not going to go as far as a full-scale, full-fledged invasion of the entire country. Ukraine's President Zelenskyy wants to maintain self-confidence. In fact, the spokesperson of his presidency also made clear there is no panic in the presidency. Speaking to people on the ground, they wonder when somebody says there is no panic, whether that actually means there's going to be panic. But overall, what Ukraine tries to maintain, as they did also over the course of the past days, as the escalation started to enter a new level, to maintain that this is a democratic, independent, sovereign country, and they're not going to give up on any land. They will not have any foreign entity to take over here and rule this country. Now, we are not so far yet, but there is, of course, concern here on the ground, especially because so many things have happened over the course of the past couple of days that were highly unlikely, that at this point, everything is likely.
Fanny, thank you very much for your reporting. The story itself is moving so fast. Let's have a listen in now to what the Ukrainian president has been saying.
Dear Ukrainians, this morning President Putin announced a special military operation in the Donbas. Russia carried out strikes on our military infrastructure, on our border guards. Explosions were heard in many cities of Ukraine. We are introducing martial law throughout the state. I have had a conversation with President Biden. The US is gathering international support. Today we need each of you to be calm. If possible, stay at home, please. We are working. The army is working. The entire security and defense sector of Ukraine is working. I, the National Security and Defense Council, the government will be in touch. Soon I will be in touch again. Don't panic. We are strong. We are ready for everything, and we will defeat anyone, because we are Ukraine. Glory to Ukraine.
Ukrainian president trying to keep the calm there. Fanny, back to you. Tell us more about the developments happening there and the mood there in the capital.
Supermarkets are being closed. In fact, everything that is normally considered essential is closed, except gasoline stations. That clearly indicates for you that more, unfortunately, may come. And those people who decided to leave today, they do not want to just wait here and see what else to come. They really want to flee towards the west. So neighboring countries like Slovakia, Poland are expecting an influx of refugees actually from Ukraine. Really, as I'm saying all of this, even me, I didn't think just a week ago it's going to happen this fast, that here in the capital city, in Kyiv, people are going to have to make this decision about to stay or leave. Now, you have to know that the border with Belarus is just to the north, 200 kilometers from here. Ukraine said that the explosions, in fact, those that we have heard this morning, that was initiated from Belarus, but Belarus said they never participated in any military support with that regard or assault and support of Russian troops. This is the problem at this point. A lot of things are blurry in terms of who
where things originate from, what we can see, of course, that the aggression from Russian troops is going beyond the region of Donbass, way beyond the border of Donbass. And the question really is just how far and how intense this, what's being called an invasion, is going to continue, and what that will trigger in terms of Ukrainians panicking, and what that panic actually means for security here on the ground.
What it sounds like there is the development of an information war, the sowing of mistrust and confusion. Thank you very much for your reporting again from Kyiv. And our correspondent Nick Connolly has arrived in the eastern town of Zaknovshina, near Ukraine's second biggest city, Kyiv. Nick, what's happening where you are? We've got Nick on the line.
Well, this is a region that is very close to Donbass, about 150 kilometers from the capital of Ukrainian held Donbass, the site of lots of explosions today, and also about 100 kilometers away from Kharkiv, Ukraine's second biggest city that lies very close to that Russian border. I got off the train, the dawn was breaking, and you saw people just looking day in and days and kind of confused with their phones, not quite believing that this was finally happening after weeks and months of headlines, that it all seemed a bit unreal. And then within a few hours, you saw people kind of getting their heads around the news and trying to react. People standing in line outside the banks trying to get cash out. I think the supply of cash ran out pretty soon. Same goes for petrol stations, fuel for cars is a big issue. We've seen some Ukrainian military tech hardware out on the streets, some anti-aircraft, what seem to be anti-aircraft missile systems stations basically in the countryside outside big cities. I also spoke to some people from the emergency services from the fire brigade who were being called up to head to Donbass, saw them stocking up on food, petrol, and basically preparing themselves for, I guess, some engagements that they'd never really thought that as fire brigade servicemen and women or emergency they'd have to really confront.
It sounds like a similar reaction to what Funny was just reporting from the capital. But of course, you're so much close to where a great deal of the action is, Nick. I guess the mood there is one of much more urgency.
Well, on the other hand, you have to remember that in small towns, people often don't have the resources, just financial resources, to go anyway. The middle class people in Kyiv are more likely to have dollars and euros and connections abroad and some kind of option to leave the country. Here, lots of people told me that they were just going to try their best to stitch it out. Although people in small villages and towns don't have any particular bomb shelters to go to. They maybe have a cellar, but that's not really very deep and runs the risk of having their own house fall on top of them. So there was a kind of stoic acceptance of the situation. Some people were telling me that they were annoyed with themselves that they hadn't stocked up on food or cash, as had been recommended in previous weeks. But no panic, as you heard say, people, yes, trying to queue, trying to get stuff, but not losing their nerve, not shouting at each other, keeping their calm. And I think that is just down to the fact that this country has been through war for 8 years, and especially here in this part of the country that is close to that Donbass region, has seen military casualties on a regular basis. This is not something people are seeing for the first time. Yes, it's on a far bigger scale. It's coming from all different directions, and that's going to be the biggest problem for Ukraine's forces, to deal with those attacks coming from Belarus, coming from Russia north of Kyiv and from the east and from annexed Crimea. Although, as you also heard, questions about the reports coming in, how much of that is actually Russian information warfare, an attempt to intimidate Ukraine with fakes. It's obviously very difficult to try and verify the video we're seeing online of various attacks to actually be sure that the locations are those that are being given. But certainly hours of extraordinary stress here in Ukraine, but no sign that average Ukrainians are really losing their heads and panicking for now.
Nick, we've been reporting on the build-up of troops along the borders over the past days and weeks, and now we're hearing reports this morning of these explosions and incursions in various spots in the south, in the east where you are, also in central parts of the country and in the capital. Can you give us more of an idea of exactly what's going on?
Based on information that is available to me online, and as I said, it's very difficult to verify, it does seem like there's a big offensive going on in Donbass, particularly in the Luhansk region. Ukrainian sources saying that the Ukrainian military was actually able to rebuff some of those attacks and regain territory being temporarily lost. Not verified. There are also some reports of Russian pressure coming near Kharkiv, Ukraine's second biggest city, 50 kilometers from the border. Some reports even of some Russian forces in Kharkiv, although that remains to be seen if that's actually accurate. Then reports coming from Crimea, annexed Crimea in the south. There are even reports of Russian military activity coming from the Black Sea in Odessa, another major city on the Black Sea coast, Ukraine's main port. It's all very difficult to verify right now, but it does seem like the jump to this is very, very widespread. Just to give you a sense of how difficult this is going to be, Ukraine has a 2,000 kilometer long border with Russia, and with Belarus it has a further 1,000 kilometers border. Now, we heard from NATO and the satellite images of Russian troops in Belarus on so-called exercises in recent weeks, and they're saying there are about 30,000 Russian troops in Belarus. The Belarusian border is very, very close to Kyiv. This is a very, basically this is Kyiv's backyard, unless that border isn't been marked or particularly defended. So that is going to be an incredible source of vulnerability for Ukraine and its leadership, trying to keep operations in Kyiv. I think this is kind of a campaign that no one really wanted to see coming. Everyone was expecting at worst an intensification of fire in Donbass, in the regions that have already been living with war for the past 8 years. But to see Ukraine, on the entirety of its borders under attack, that was something that no one really wanted to.
Okay, Nick Connolly, we're going to have to leave it there. The line's starting to get a little fuzzy. Thank you very much for your reporting from the east of the country there on the ground. We're now joined by Artis Fabriks. He is the Defence Minister of Latvia. Welcome. Share some of your thoughts with us. What's going through your head when you see what's happening in Ukraine this morning?
Well, in Latvia, in Hansestadt, Riga, in Baltic countries, of course, all our hearts and minds are with Ukrainians, because we understand very much what they are enduring now. Because what we know is that Russians are attacking Ukraine from three sides, which means from the land side of Russian-Ukrainian border, from the sea side of the Black Sea, as well as there are incursions from the Belarusian side, since Belarus is a part of already a Russian operative area. Additionally, we know that there are also diversion groups sent into the Ukraine. And of course, we all know that Russians are bombing cities and bombing other places with different type of missile systems. So this is what we know. We also are looking forward very much to the discussions in NATO and European Union about the next steps which should be taken, because unfortunately our analysis in the Baltic countries, in Poland and Sweden and also in Washington appear to be very correct. And at this moment we have only one chance. First, we must start immediate and massive sanctions against aggressor state of Russia. Secondly, we must provide Ukrainian army and Ukrainian population with massive aid so they can prevail. This is the only way where we can still say that, that blood of Ukrainians will not be also on our hands, because our duty, our moral duty, is to assist with humanitarian aid, with lethal aid. And I hope that finally also those people which we call Russlandsversteher or appeasers will finally understand how wrong they have been in their assessments about Kremlin's intentions.
Minister, you say Ukraine is being attacked from three sides, which underscores the reports that are coming into us and from our correspondents and people on the ground. How would you then describe this invasion by Russia? Is it an attack on the east, or is it an attack on Ukraine as a whole?
It's attack on Ukraine as a whole. It's very obvious. There is a full information available, because bombings are going also as far as the very western border of Ukraine. So simply Putin's regime and Russia is trying to put Ukrainians on knees. And of course, this is also a very, very important lesson for all of us which are observing now this mad war waged by Kremlin.
And you say that full sanctions are needed. Are we going to get those full sanctions from the EU as well as its partners?
Well, as far as it depends on our government and our position, we are ready to do anything to stop this aggressor. And I hope that governments in Berlin and Paris and London will just do the same. Because if you don't do this, if they don't do this, then the price in future will rise with every hour and every day. Are you ready to pay that?
I know I wouldn't be, that's for sure. Minister, you also said the second thing that's important is providing aid to Ukraine. Is Ukraine getting enough support from, for example, Germany?
I don't think there can be too much support to Ukraine, just like there can't be too much of sanctions. And I would once more use this chance of Deutsche Welle to appeal to German society. Please open your eyes. Please also allow Ukrainians to receive a lethal aid, because situation is totally different than it was before. And Germany is the largest European country. It's time to act for you now, because from you depends a lot.
What's your message to the Ukrainian people? We've heard from the president saying to not panic, and from our correspondent in Kyiv, who was saying it's best to stay put right now and not mobilize, not be on the streets. What's your message to the people there?
Well, it's very difficult to give an advice when you are not a Ukrainian yourself at this moment. But of course, we see that Ukrainians trust their country, and they are brave people. And we keep fingers crossed that you will prevail, you will endure, and you will be capable to defend your freedoms. And as much as it depends from such countries as mine, and probably many others, we will do as much as possible to help. At the end, the right thing always wins, and the right side is on your side. But actually, I have not only a message to Ukrainians. I would really would like to appeal also to Russians, because they are misled by their leadership. And do you really, as a Russian soldiers, are ready to kill your Slavonic brothers, your Ukrainians, just because somebody is sending you to this country? It's a very wrong thing. You are not defending Russia. You are simply defending an aggressor.
There are so many people on both sides of the border with family and friends in Ukraine, in Russia. A very pertinent message there from Latvia's Defence Minister, Artis Papriks. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Dankeschön.
And I'm here with DW's Chief International Editor, Richard Walker. Richard, a lot happening as we've been reporting. Talk us through what we know at this moment.
Well, as we've been hearing from our reporters on the ground, I mean, what we are witnessing is pretty much the worst-case scenario, which the Americans in particular have been warning of with greater and greater urgency in recent weeks. That Vladimir Putin, with this recognition of these separatist regions in eastern Ukraine earlier this week, that he wasn't going to stop there, that was actually the prelude to something much, much larger. And it does seem to be all-out total invasion of Ukraine, with the goal, as Putin said himself in his address overnight, the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, and press for bringing to justice those who have committed numerous bloody crimes. That is a signal that, I mean, his goal is to remove the government, to install presumably a government that he favours. He said that it is not his goal, it's not his objective to remain in Ukraine in the long term. But he also has said in the past, in recent weeks, that his goal is not to invade Ukraine. So it's not at all clear whether we can take that at face value. And this notion of demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, it frames Ukraine as a threat to Russia, which is a pretty hard case to make if you look at the objective facts.
Yeah.
And denazification of Ukraine also, this is Putin's position has essentially been that Ukraine has been taken over by illegitimate nationalists and Nazis. If you look at Volodymyr Zelenskyy, he's a democratically elected leader who happens also to be Jewish, who lost ancestors in the Holocaust. So there is an offensive element to what he said there. But if we take that as what Putin is now saying to his people on this day, that's what we're looking at. This is total war aimed at regime change, essentially, toppling the government.
That said, what do you see happening in the coming hours? Do you expect Ukraine to launch a counteroffensive.
Well, Ukraine is already saying that it's fighting back, but it is, of course, it will be able to inflict some casualties, and it is claiming already to have shot down a number of Russian planes. But the Ukrainian army simply, and the Ukrainian military, is not a match for the force that we've seen assembled here by Vladimir Putin. This is what lay behind the warnings that we've seen in recent weeks, is the scale of this force, the number of battalions that Vladimir Putin has moved to the north, to the east, to the south, completely surrounding Ukraine on three sides. So it is doubtful that the Ukrainians will be able to stand up to this onslaught for very long. So then it becomes a question, essentially, of what happens next. Looking at this from the outside world, the Western world has obviously done as much as it felt it could do to deter this from taking place, with threatening sanctions and already imposing some sanctions after the recognition of these regions early in the week.
But also by bringing in troops themselves to neighbouring countries.
That's true. But of course, that's another level. That's not going to protect Ukraine. That's about protecting countries like Latvia. And it was very interesting, of course, and compelling to hear the defense minister of Latvia just now speaking to us. Those countries are the front line of NATO defenses. Ukraine is not going to receive any Western troops to defend it. So it's, in military terms, it's standing alone. It has received a certain amount of weapons in recent weeks from Western countries, not including Germany, and that's caused a lot of discussion about Germany's responsibilities. But in terms of actual troops on the ground, that's not going to happen. Joe Biden's been very clear about that, and of course that would present the risk of a confrontation directly between the two superpowers, the US and Russia, and that could lead to a very even more serious war, obviously.
On the topic of Germany, we saw Germany come to the table as far as sanctions go and really pull out that big card with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, putting that on hold, that project, which will hurt both sides, but really hurt Russia financially. But as far as helping out on the weapons front, do you expect that that topic to be raised here in Germany today?
Well, certainly that debate is not going away. I mean, Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, has been doing the rounds of television interviews this week, explaining the move since the recognition of those regions. We're also expecting to hear from him in about an hour, I think, so it'll be interesting to see what he says then. So far, he's very much stuck to his line that providing weapons is not what Germany wants to do. And there are various arguments that he uses to back that up. But just this morning, a very senior member of the Green Party was calling for Germany to go further. The Green Party has generally been more hawkish in the course of this crisis so far. It has had a long-standing, very critical view of Russia, the direction that Russia has been going in. And there are various voices around other political parties also calling for weapons to be supplied. I would assume that the government is going to stay with this line. The reality is that supplying weapons to Ukraine at this point is unlikely to change the situation on the ground. In effect, weapons supplies, if weapons supplies were going to achieve anything, it would have been more as a deterrent effect, to try to make it clear to Vladimir Putin that he couldn't just walk in and take Ukraine easily. And it's obviously too late for that now. But there is a really intense debate beginning in Germany, really since the beginning of this week, when Vladimir Putin announced his recognition of these leaders, about whether Germany's whole attitude to Russia in recent decades, and especially since the annexation of Crimea in 2014, has simply been completely wrong-headed, based on wishful thinking that Russia was a country that could be engaged with, that Russia was a country that could be kind of coaxed into a more democratic and liberal and peaceful attitude to the world. And I'd like to draw attention to one really extraordinary intervention by the chief of the German army, writing on his LinkedIn page just a couple of hours ago, absolutely condemning what he sees as a lack of investment in the military, saying that he's fed up, that the army is is essentially standing empty-handed when looking at the options that it could provide to supporting other members of the NATO alliance, for instance, supporting Latvia and other countries that are now feeling a greater threat. So a really extraordinary outburst there by the head of the German army, indicating that he views that Germany and German politics have simply underestimated the threat from Russia for many years now.
DW's Chief International Editor Richard Walker, thank you very much for the analysis.